everyone, it's Jack from Cultaholic.com. It's Tuesday morning and that means that there is a lot of wrestling news. Some concerning Monday Night Raw, a very eventful Monday Night Raw from last night, and some concerning goings on from elsewhere in the world of wrestling. So, without any further ado, let's take a look at those lovely headlines. First of all, some happy news as Becky Lynch has announced that she is pregnant and has also relinquished the Raw Women's Championship. Next up, could we be seeing a return of the infamous wildcard rule as WWE introduced brand-to-brand invitation? And finally, a big match looks to be in the works for Backlash featuring two massive WWE superstars. So first of all, yes, last night's Raw opened with some major news and it was perhaps one of the most eventful and most memorable openings to a Raw maybe in the show's entire history. That's because Becky Lynch took to the ring with the Women's Money in the Bank briefcase, which of course she didn't win. She was the Raw Women's Champion. She wasn't even in the match for the briefcase, but she had it in her possession. She hit the ring and she made a big announcement. That announcement is, as I've just mentioned, that she is pregnant and will be stepping away from the ring for the foreseeable future. That's, first of all, a massive congratulations to both Becky Lynch and Seth Rollins on this news. It's very exciting times in the world of wrestling and a nice bit of good news amongst what's been some pretty difficult times recently. And throughout the show, Becky was congratulated by several of the members of the roster and Vince McMahon himself, and it's all looking really good. But of course, there is the crucial question, what does this mean for the Raw Women's Championship? Well, that issue was also dealt with in the opening segment of last night's Raw. Becky invited Asuka to the ring. Asuka was incredibly confused because up until this point, Becky hadn't actually announced her pregnancy. She just said that she was taking time away. And Asuka seemed rather beside herself that Becky had somehow got her hands on the briefcase which Asuka won only a couple of nights ago. But then Becky revealed that she had been in contact with WWE's officials and managed to get the whole scenario of the match changed. What that meant is that the briefcase did not contain a contract for a title shot against Becky Lynch, but rather the briefcase, which was then physically demonstrated by Becky, contained the Raw Women's Championship itself. That's right, Sunday night's match wasn't for a #1 contendership spot at all. It was actually, secretly, a title match, and that means that Asuka is now the Raw Women's Champion. So first of all, this seemed to be a very classy and nice way of doing things. It was a very feel-good moment to start Raw, both in the case of Becky Lynch and in the case of Asuka. And with this title win, she becomes, I guess, one of the winningest women's superstars of the modern era. She's held quite a lot of belts now. She's held obviously the SmackDown Women's Championship, now the Raw Women's Championship, and had of course that epic NXT Women's Championship reign. In fact, now that I think of it, alongside Kairi Sane, she is obviously a tag team champion as well, or a former tag team champion. So she's done kind of the quadruple crown, as it were. So pretty good start to the show for Asuka. We don't yet know who Asuka's next challenger is going to be, but this is big news, and it's certainly one of the more unique title changes I can ever remember. And also, could this be the beginnings of a babyface turn for Asuka? Because just by being involved in this joyous announcement from Becky, she also seemed to come across in a really nice way. She congratulated Becky on the news. She was clearly delighted to now be the Raw Women's Champion. And I think, looking at it, and this is just my own interpretation, it seems like Asuka could well be a babyface going forwards. If that is the case, then it does kind of make sense, doesn't it? Because we've gone from one really long, epic babyface Raw Women's Championship reign in the form of Becky Lynch's reign to hopefully another one in the form of Asuka. And I mean, yes, she's never been fully a babyface. You know, she's often been this mad ass-kicking badass of a babyface on NXT, taking on fellow babyfaces and heels alike. But I do think it's really compelling to see her back in a more sympathetic role. But then again, that is just my own interpretation of last night's event. She could well still be a heel heading forwards. We'll just have to wait and see. Next up, let's talk about this whole brand-to-brand invitation thing that WWE seemed to introduced to us last night. It's a little bit confusing, so I'll try and explain it as best I can. Basically, what happened last night on Raw was Drew McIntyre defeated Andrade in a non-title match. Yet again, Andrade has been kind of his punching bag lately. A very competitive punching bag, but a punching bag nonetheless. And in the aftermath of that victory, Drew got on the mic and announced that the next guy he would face would be a member of the SmackDown roster because WWE had introduced this brand-to-brand invitation from Raw to SmackDown, which next week will see King Corbin, head to Raw to take on Drew McIntyre. This is big news, and there was a lot of speculation from various news sources about this heading into last night's show. Not specifically to do with Drew or Baron Corbin, but more just in a broad sense. Does this mean the end of the brand split, at least while the lockdown's in effect and WWE's roster is considerably thinned? It does make sense as well, doesn't it? Because given ongoing circumstances, WWE have less flexibility when it comes to picking members of their usually very deep roster, so it does make sense to kind of partially merge the brands once again. But naturally, of course, this has sparked fears of a return of the wildcard rule, which Vince McMahon introduced last year to quite heavy criticism, just because it was kind of loose, there weren't any really established rules, and it just seemed to be an excuse to bring the bigger stars from one network to another and vice versa, and it didn't really help any storylines. This seems to be quite similar, but without the whole wildcard rule tag, and details are really sparse at the moment. We don't actually know the parameters of this whole brand-to-brand invitation. It could just be a one-off. It could just be Drew taking on Baron Corbin next week, and that's the end of it. No more brand-to-brand invitations. But at the same time, I think it's more likely, given once again the current situation, that this is a reason or an excuse for WWE to switch up the brands a little bit without committing to actual roster moves. And again, I don't blame them for that. I just hope that this time, unlike the wildcard rule, there are certain rules in place, and those rules, are able to be stuck to. In fact, after just consulting my notes there, I've realized that it won't be a one-off because, of course, it's been announced as well that Charlotte Flair will be appearing on SmackDown. Charlotte has, of course, recently been on the Raw brand, even though she's currently NXT Women's Champion. And yeah, it seems as though this is going to be some sort of system that is set in place heading forwards. One positive I will say is that it doesn't yet seem to be quite as extensive as the wildcard rule, because that originally started off as, I think, 3 superstars from one brand could head to the other one, and 3 from the other could head back to the original one, and then it all just became a crutch that WWE, I think it's fair to say, relied upon too much. But as it stands, we've got Baron Corbin coming to Raw next Monday, we've got Charlotte Flair going to SmackDown on Friday, and that seems to be it for now. We will monitor the situation heading forwards and update you on any lovely potential temporary brand moves. I've not got a lot to work with here. Next up, it looks as though a huge match is likely to occur at Backlash, WWE's next pay-per-view, after some more events last night. Now, the match hasn't officially been confirmed, but it looks very likely to go ahead, and it looks like a rematch from WrestleMania 36. One of the big feature matches of this year's WrestleMania, of course, was the last man standing match between Edge and Randy Orton. Edge, of course, coming off his recent return to the ring at the Royal Rumble. Randy Orton engaging in a very personal feud with Edge, where he attacked his very reasoning for coming back to the squared circle. Edge, of course, got the victory in that last man standing match in brutal fashion, smashing Orton's head with a concerto and keeping him down for the 10 count. And Randy Orton showed up on Raw last night and tried to congratulate Edge and tried to say, well done, the better man won. But then he thought better of it and changed his wording and said the better man may have won, but the better wrestler didn't. Orton then challenged Edge to a rematch, but there will be no stipulation attached this time if Edge accepts. Instead, it'll just be a normal singles match, a wrestling match, and Orton, quite unusually for WWE right now, really did stress the word wrestling. It's weird, isn't it? As our editor Owen pointed out, it seems as though they've done this feud in reverse, starting off with the big stipulation match and all the weapons and the backstage brawl and everything, and progressing to a normal, no-frills singles match. But WWE haven't looked at it that way, though. They've looked at it as a step up in intensity, and in fact the show went off the air with the match being hyped as one of potentially the best wrestling matches ever, a claim which I'm sure will cause quite a stir on social media. That is, of course, if Edge accepts the challenge, because Raw went off the air last night with that still hanging in the air. Edge didn't say anything in response, but you have to assume naturally that he will accept the challenge and that this normal singles match will go ahead at Backlash. Next up, Backlash isn't the only big wrestling show on the horizon, of course, because on May 23rd, AEW will put on the second ever Double or Nothing event. And a few matches have already been announced for that event. Of course, we have the final of the TNT Championship tournament between Cody and Lance Archer to crown the inaugural TNT champion. We also have the AEW World Championship match between Jon Moxley and Brody Lee, Mr. Brody Lee, excuse me. But one of the other big matches on the card is the Casino Ladder match, which is going to be kind of a number one contenders multi-man ladder brawl. This looks to be replacing AEW's Casino Battle Royale, which has often been used to decide number one contenders in the past. This looks like it's going to have less entrants, but it's going to be probably more intense, with ladders being involved, less comedy spots that you get in a battle royal, and I think it's probably a good call. Well, the news here is that a new entrant has been confirmed for the match. We already had one. We already knew that Darby Allin was going to be in that casino ladder match. Now we know that Colt Cabana is also going to partake. We don't yet know any of the other entrants in the match, although I would like to suggest that probably Sammy Guevara will end up in there. A lot of people have been suggesting that MJF is on the cusp of an AEW World title shot as well. However, he is already booked in a match on the card. He is set to take on Jungle Boy in singles action. So yeah, so far we only have two potential winners to gauge the chances of. I think that Darby Allin's chances could be quite good. He's got previous with Jon Moxley. The pair have a good chemistry together. They've wrestled together and teamed together on the indies before as well, shortly before Moxley's elbow injury. But at the same time, I'm not quite certain. I don't know if Darby Allin's going to win, especially because I think Moxley's probably going to retain the title, and that would lead to a face versus face encounter. But I'm not saying that wouldn't work. I'm just saying it's not so likely. And then, of course, we have Colt Cabana's chances. I don't think Colt is particularly likely to get a title shot, but hey, you never know. AEW could always pull a surprise out of the bag and push a slightly lower card guy up to a title shot pretty instantly. They have the benefit of doing that, of course, because they're a fairly new company. Not everything is so rigidly set in stone, despite the rankings they've got going on, and I think it could shock quite a few people, but at the same time, I would also be very shocked if that was the case. So we'll keep an eye on any future competitors announced for that match. There is sure to be quite a few more in the coming weeks as we lead up to Double or Nothing, which is once again on May 23rd. And finally, it's been accepted for quite some time now that certainly in American wrestling, one of the best women's divisions around belongs to Impact Wrestling. And while historically Impact have often been criticised for a number of things to do with their promotion, one surprisingly consistent strength of theirs has been the women's, or the Knockouts division as they call it. So in good news for Impact fans, one of the key figures, one of the biggest characters in their women's division has re-signed with the company. And that is none other than Su Yung, who's kind of their Undertaker in a way. She takes part sometimes in these weird conceptual matches, which, looking at it now, were a bit of a precursor to the more cinematic matches we're seeing these days during the lockdown era. She had these weird cinematic journey-like matches with the likes of Ali, for example, who is now, of course, the Bunny in AEW. This was originally reported by PW Insider, and then Impact took to Twitter to confirm that yes, indeed, Su Yung had re-signed with the company. And then, in quite humorous fashion, and without breaking the old kayfabe, they announced that Susie had also re-signed a contract. Now, for those of you thinking, who on earth is Susie? Is she a new wrestler on the rise in Impact? I've not quite heard of her. No, it's Su Young's alter ego. She's doing kind of a Fiend / Bray Wyatt thing, where Su Yung is really creepy and horror inspired, whereas Susie is really sugary, happy-go-lucky, just a nice character. It's the classic split personality gimmick. And I think this is a good move. I think that Su Yung is a great wrestler, but I think her strength really lies in her gimmick and her creepiness, and now this new duality between Su Yung and Susie. And I think that while Impact's women's division often has fantastic wrestlers, I think that what is so invaluable in wrestling quite a lot of the time is characters, and Su Yung is about as character driven as it gets. So that is it for this news video. Thank you very much for watching. My match recommendation for today is, let's go back to the days of Rated RKO in honor of this upcoming Edge and Randy Orton rematch, which of course, remember, could be the best wrestling match ever. The match in question is Survivor Series 2006 Team Rated RKO taking on Team D-Generation X. Does Randy Orton and Edge's teamwork pay off in that match? Have a look and see for yourself. I've been Jack from Cultaholic.com. Thank you once again for watching. Stay safe out there, stay positive of course, and I'll see you very soon.